For the fifth chapter in Michy's Endgame technique book, I'm actually going to break it into two separate videos. In the book, it's a very short chapter, very straightforward, uh, but in kind of researching for this video, I've discovered so much extra information about bearing off again when you have no contact um, from so many backgammon experts and top commentators and things that I just think it's worth two videos. So this first video we're going to look at what Michy says in the book, and a second part B is going to be looking at what other people also say. And I think it's worth, for completeness sake, having the two of them. But I'm going to start with Michy, and it said this is his fifth chapter looks at bearing off when you don't have contact. So you're not worrying about blots. You're simply racing to get your checkers off the board faster than your opponent, and trying to use your rolls as efficiently as possible. And he starts off with the beginner's rule, which is it's very straightforward. Basically, you should bear off whenever you can. If you roll a number which bears off a checker, use it and bear off that checker. On the other hand, he then later says if you roll a number which doesn't bear off a checker, try and use it to fill a gap. So he starts off with the example that I showed initially there. You roll a 4 and a 3. Well, the 4 is easy. 4 will bear off a checker for you. And now you've got a 3 to use. You're not going to get anything off, but you can fill in the gap on the 3 point by moving 6 to 3. Now, I was wondering when I first did this, could you also maybe fill in the thing in fill the space in the 1 point when you take it off? But now, if you look at it, I was kind of testing it out, and I tested it out with the XG. Problem with my question or my suggested alternative there is I've left that gap in the 3 points. So where you can, fill in the gap rather than leave a gap with the spare checker. Now that's very easy and straightforward. He spends one page in that, and that's it. But he moves on very quickly to rules for intermediates, which are probably going to be more helpful. And the first rule is again the same: bear off whenever you can with one die. Bear off a checker. But if it takes you 2 dice to get a checker off, you're better off using the 2 dice to improve your checker distribution rather than wasting 2 dice just to bear off a single checker. So here's a couple of examples he gives. You roll a 3 and a 1 here. Again, we're white, usual format I use, white bearing into the bottom right. Well, we can bear off with the 3 and we can bear off with the 1. That's what we should do. No worrying about anything like that. That if you can bear it off, you should. So rather than trying anything fancy, like we could move the 3 from the 5 point to the 2 point, and then the 1 from the 5 to the 4, and we got a beautifully distributed pattern of checkers. But it's just not efficient. We're not getting checkers off, so we're wasting time, wasting a roll here, even just for the sake of a better distribution. So no, if you can take your checkers off, do. But he gives another example where you can't. So here's a situation where we roll a 3 and a 2. We don't have a checker on the 3 or the 2 point. Now what we could do is take the checker off the 5 point and take it off. So use the 3-2 to take it off. But that's a situation where we're kind of wasting 2 rolls, 2 dice on 1 checker. So instead, we're better off just working to improve our distribution. So we can go a 6 to a 3, and then the 6 to the 4 improves our distribution. We could move other things forward with the 2 point, something like that. I was looking at that when I was kind of preparing for this video. Is that a better use of it? It's not, because what have I done there? I created a gap. So it's more efficient to kind of do the original, where it's the format where you have just 6 to 3 point and 6 to 4 point. So based on what we've done here, why don't you pause this? There's one more example Michy gives in the book. So I'm including, for completeness sake, I always include everything that's in Michy's books. I think you'll find this fairly straightforward. You have a 3 and a 1 to play. What do you want to do? Pause the video and have a think. And taking it that you've now unpaused, well, yes, we could. You can use the 3 and the 1 to get the checker off the 4 point, move it forward and get it off. But you'll know by now that Michy says don't do that. If you need to use the 2 dice to get 1 checker off, you're far better off improving your distribution. So you can do that by 6 goes to the 3, and the 2 goes to the 1, and it's better off. Now, there was a question on the Sunday Florida Backgammon Club. We're discussing this section of the book, and we're saying, could you not, instead of the 2 going to the 1, could your 6 not go to the 5? The problem with the 6 going to the 5, it could lead to wastage later on. So if you move the 6 to the 5, so I should have prepared a slide for this, but basically, if you look at the position here, and instead of having a checker on the 1 point, you put that back on the 2, and you move your checker on the 6 point forward onto the 5 point. The problem with that is, if you roll a 6, well, you can only take the 5 off. There's a little bit of wastage there. Whereas in this, the way we have it now is, if you roll a 5, well, you're going to get the full 5 pips worth of value moving things forward. So the correct move is to move it like that. On the other hand, I'll come back to Michy in the next video, but Michy just does talk about a principle that sometimes it's worth wasting a pip to save a roll. And in Michy's book, he gives an example of this now. So here's where we rolled a 5 and a 4, and I think intuitively we think, well, look, we can use that 4 to get a checker off the 4 point, and then we've got the 5 to play, so we just move that forward. The problem with that is, if we roll a 2 now, and we're more likely than not going to roll a 2 in the next 2 rolls, it's more likely than that we are going to roll a 2. If we roll a 2, we're going to not be able to take it off. So going back to the original situation, there is a way where we could avoid that. We can waste a pip, but we can save that situation. And that's where, instead of playing the 4 off, using the 4 to take the checker off, we use the 4 to move it off 6 point, and we use the 5 to take the checker off. And yes, we're a pip furthermore on the board, but now at least if we roll a 2, we've got a 2 in the place. Now we could be unlucky. We could roll something that leaves causes more problems for us. But at least we've set ourselves up as best as possible. And if you compare it to where we have possibility of rolling a 2, that was the original possibility. This is just far tidier. And interestingly, if you look at the difference, there's 176 millipoints of blunder there to do the wrong move. And this is one of the messages that all the commentators are saying. Look, a lot of this chapter is very easy. But even if you get a kind of an error of kind of a 40 millipoint error, they're saying, look, you don't need to be making those errors. So get yourself accurate in this section, rather than kind of be wasting time in it. Now, Michy then gives 2 scenarios for experts. He talks about for experts. He doesn't give any rules for experts. He just gives 2 positions. One of which I've heard a couple of commentators talk about. Everyone says it's just too obscure to be worth mentioning, but I am going to mention it just because it's in the book, and I want to give you a complete rundown of what's in the book. And the second, which I think actually is possibly is quite helpful, and you can apply a rule out of it. So the first position is this: you roll a 2-2, and you're white as usual. Well, obviously, we're going to take the checker off with the first 2. It's really hard to avoid anything, but you're going to roll one of the 5s forward, and then on further again is likely. It's what do you do with the fourth 2, and the natural, I think, thing is, well, clear from the rear, so you move the last one up there. And Michy just points out that this is actually a significant blunder to do this, and I have to admit, I probably would have done that on the basis of clearing from the rear, because he said, look what happens again when you roll 2s. So if you roll he talks about a 6-2, but he does that because any big number, it could be a 5-2, a 4-2, a 3-2, it has the same effect. He said, look what's going to happen when you roll a 6-2. Well, your 6 comes off and your 2 moves forward. And he said, the problem is, what happens if you roll a 6-2 again? Your 6 comes off and your 2 moves forward. And now look, we have 5 checkers on the 1 point, and it's going to take at least 3 rolls without doubles to get in. He said, if you go back to the original position and just be a little bit more careful, the 2 comes off, we get from the 5 to the 1, and instead of moving from 5 to 3, we move from 3 to 1. Now, I said to you I probably wouldn't have done that. I possibly would have, on the basis that, in terms of wastage and things, there's no harm having that checker on the 5 point to pick up some of the high rolls. But he said this is a better position because now look what happens when you roll multiple, sorry, a high number and a 2 on multiple occasions. So we'll go with the 6-2 again. You roll the 6-2, 6 comes off, the 2 goes forward. Now you roll a second 6-2, the 6 comes off, the 2 goes forward, and we've only got 2 rows to go. So he points that out as, and it does work out as a bit of a blunder. I wouldn't worry too much about it. As I said, all the commentators I've heard talking about this position and talking about Michy's book said it's so obscure, like you could worry about it, but it's never going to, it is going to apply at some stage in your life, but there are more important things to study than that particular position. But he does give one other position that I think is helpful, and this is when you roll a 4-1. Now, what are we going to do with the 1? Michy has he says it. Michy comes in Michy's seminar. I'm going to talk about in the next video. He says it again. If you have a checker on the ace point and you roll a 1, take off that checker. Michy said something in a seminar I saw him talk about where he said, look, in 20 years of playing backgammon, he's never found a situation where that would be wrong. So we're going to use the 1 to take the checker off the ace point. It's what do we do with the 4? And again, I think I probably would have, before reading the book, would have said, well, look, we don't want to stack up checkers on the 2 points, so I think what I would have done would have gone 5-1. But that is a mistake, and it's a mistake. And this is something that I think probably could be useful learning on. Michy talks about. He said, if you have 3 gaps on your 3 point, your 4 point, and your 5 point, it's one of the worst structures you can have when you're bearing off. When you're bearing off, having gaps on your 3 point, 4 point, and 5 point is one of the worst structures you can have. There's tons of rolls you can roll next go which don't take a single checker off. So it's kind of completely wasteful. So avoid having 3 gaps, having a gap in 4, 5, and 3 point altogether. So instead, when we take the 1 off, which is correct, we do the rather ugly looking thing of the 6 to the 2. I have to admit, when I looked at that, I thought that just looks very inflexible and ugly. But it's not. You've avoided having the big gap in the middle. And for that reason, Michy strongly recommends that. And that's the chapter. As I said, it's a short chapter in the book, and a lot of commentators, that's not true. A couple of commentators in the book have said about how there's not much it could do with having a bit more in it. And as I said, in researching for this, I've come across quite a deal more about the simple bear off, the non-contact bear off, which when you think about it, should be easy, but there's lots of little rules. And so the next video, I propose to take you through those rules, and I think it's probably a more comprehensive thing if we're studying endgame technique. Michy's great, but if there's more to Michy, let's at least include it as well. So that's the purpose of the part B video that will be coming up shortly.